In order for me to find joy again, I had to find myself again. And if I'm being honest, I didn't even realize I had lost myself. I spent so much time grieving the future I thought I was supposed to have that I forgot to look at the life that was still sitting right in front of me. The more I started reconnecting with myself, the more I started reconnecting with joy. And that's what I want to talk about today. Hey there, and welcome to Mama Drama and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel. I used to think the hardest part of losing something was the moment you lost it. What I've learned is that sometimes the hardest part is grieving the future you thought you were going to have. For most of my adult life, I thought I knew what the future looked like. Not every detail, of course. Life never works exactly the way we plan it. But I thought I knew the big things. I thought I'd always be part of a family of 5. I thought we'd celebrate birthdays together, spend holidays together, and watch our boys grow into men together. I thought one day the kids would leave home and my husband and I would enter a new season together. I thought we'd build the dream we'd spent years talking about. A little bit of land, a porch swing, a place our boys could always come home to, a place where future holidays would be celebrated, a place where grandkids might someday run through the yard while we sat outside and watched. For a long time, I thought losing my marriage was the thing I was grieving. But looking back, I realized I was grieving so much more than that. I was grieving an entire future. And before I could learn how to find joy again, I first had to acknowledge everything I thought I'd lost. The family I thought we'd always be. When the boys were little, life was busy. It was messy, it was exhausting, and honestly, it was one of the best times of my life. Back then, everything revolved around family. When my husband was home from work, we were always doing something as a family. Whether it was camping, floating on the river, swimming, movie nights, game nights, Monster Jam, escape rooms, or just spending a Saturday together, we genuinely enjoyed being together. Looking back, those are some of the memories I treasure most because they weren't about big events. They were about sharing life together. Nothing about it was perfect, but it was ours. There was a closeness to those years that I'll always be grateful for. It felt like we were building something together, not just raising kids, but building a family. And when I pictured the future, I never really pictured fancy things. I always pictured us staying close as a family. Birthdays, holidays, and family dinners felt like things we'd continue sharing together no matter how much life changed around us. Even if you had asked me years ago what would happen if my marriage didn't work out, I think I still would have said we'd find a way to come together for the kids. I believed we'd celebrate birthdays and holidays together, that we'd always find a way to show up as a family. That was the future I saw. And it wasn't just about the present. I had dreams for the years after the boys grew up too. Once they were out of school, I thought my husband and I would finally have time to focus on us again. I pictured traveling with him while he was still working, eventually moving onto some acreage, building the home we'd always talked about, and enjoying the next chapter together after he retired. Not because I cared about the house itself. What I wanted was a gathering place. What I really wanted was a place our boys could always come home to. A place for summer barbecues, holiday gatherings, game nights, and all the little moments in between. Somewhere family would always be welcome and where life would keep unfolding around us. I didn't spend 24 years imagining that future because I thought it might happen. I spent 24 years imagining that future because I believed it would happen. It wasn't a fantasy in my mind. It was the plan. It was the life I thought we were building toward one ordinary day at a time. Looking back, all those years of birthdays, holidays, camping trips, school events, and family traditions felt like pieces of a life we were building together. That's why losing it wasn't one moment. Looking back, there wasn't one defining moment. It was a collection of conversations, holidays, milestones, and realizations that slowly showed me my future was changing. Little by little, the future I thought I knew began changing. For me, the realization happened slowly. First came the twins' 16th birthday. It was the first major family celebration after I discovered the affair. And for the first time, a question entered my mind. What if this is forever? After that, the reminders just kept coming. There was the divorce paperwork, Thanksgiving, and eventually the reality that my husband had a house of his own, a different address, a different life. But if I'm being honest, Christmas was the one that hit me the hardest. That was the year I wrapped presents by myself and handled all the things we'd always done together. I went to my husband's family's Christmas gathering with our boys, and sitting there without him, I could feel the weight of how much life had changed. For the first time, it became impossible to pretend this was temporary. The future I'd spent years imagining was gone, and I had to start figuring out what came next. And somewhere between the twins' birthday, the paperwork, Thanksgiving, another house, and Christmas, the truth slowly settled in. The future I'd spent more than 2 decades imagining wasn't the future I was going to have. Not because I chose a different dream, but because life chose one for me. And for a while, that was incredibly hard to accept. The hard reality of becoming 4. As hard as it was to grieve the future I thought I was going to have, there was something else I wasn't prepared for. The reality of living a life that looked completely different from the one I had known for more than 20 years. I think one of the first holidays that felt different was Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving had always been a family holiday for us. We spend it with my family every year. My husband absolutely loved my mom's dressing. She makes it completely from scratch, and it was one of his favorite things. I remember making him a plate that year and making sure to put extra dressing on it because I knew how much he loved it. Looking back, I don't know why I did it. I just did. I think it came from the fact that I was carrying so many emotions at once. I was hurt, angry, confused, and heartbroken, but I also still cared. Nothing about that season was simple, and most days I felt like I was trying to sort through 10 different emotions at the same time. I was still hoping somehow things would work out. I was still trying to make sense of everything that had happened. Nothing about that season was simple. Most days I felt 10 different emotions before lunch. That Thanksgiving was hard for a lot of reasons. It was the second Thanksgiving without my dad after he passed away the year before. It was the first Thanksgiving without my husband. And for the first time, I could feel the family dynamic changing. When my dad died, my husband had naturally stepped into that role as one of the main men in our family. Now my dad was gone, and my husband was gone too. The two men who had always been there weren't there anymore, and that hurt. But if I'm being honest, the hardest part of becoming a family of four wasn't my husband being gone. I was already used to that. For years, my husband had worked out of town and was gone 6 to 7 months out of the year. That wasn't new. What was new was my kids being gone. That was the part that took my breath away. At first, they would leave on Saturday morning around 11 and come back Sunday afternoon. It wasn't even that long, a day and a half, but it felt different. Before the separation, if the kids were gone and my husband was working out of town, I'd usually enjoy the quiet for a little bit. It felt like a chance to recharge and catch my breath. But afterward, the quiet didn't feel peaceful anymore. It felt empty. I missed hearing the boys barreling down the stairs, asking where something was or wanting to know what we were eating. I missed all the little noises that came with having 3 boys in the house. Funny enough, the things that probably annoyed me once in a while became the things I missed the most. And every time they left, I was reminded that this wasn't a temporary situation anymore. This was my life now. One thing that surprised me was how much the little things hurt. I had a sign in our living room that said "Party of 5." It was just a decoration. Or at least I thought it was, until I had to take it down. I remember searching online for a Party of 4 sign, but I couldn't find one. And eventually I realized I was going to have to put the sign away. I know that probably sounds silly to some people. It's just a sign. But it wasn't really about the sign. It was about what it represented. For years, we had been a family of 5, the 5 of us. That was our identity. And taking that sign down felt like acknowledging something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. We weren't a party of 5 anymore. We were a party of 4. And that realization hurt a lot. When the boys were gone, I tried to keep myself busy. Maisie and I went for walks almost every day. I spent time journaling, cleaning, doing laundry, talking to my mom or sister-in-law, scrolling my phone, and honestly crying more than I wanted to admit. Looking back, I wasn't thriving. I wasn't finding joy yet. I was just trying to get through the day. That's really the best way I know how to describe that season. I was just surviving. Everything felt harder than it should have. I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't eating much, and my brain felt like it was wrapped in a fog. I was making mistakes at work that I normally never would have made, and getting frustrated with myself because I couldn't understand what was wrong. Looking back now, I know what was happening. My body and mind were trying to process something they never saw coming. But at the time, all I knew was that I wasn't functioning like myself. At the time, I was still helping with the back end of our business, and I remember getting frustrated with myself because I couldn't focus. I couldn't remember things. I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking, what is wrong with me? Why am I struggling so much? Looking back now, I understand what was happening. My body was in shock. My mind was trying to process something it never saw coming. But at the time, I didn't know that. I just knew that everything felt hard. Some of my hardest moments weren't the dramatic ones. They were the quiet ones. The nights I sat alone on my couch crying. The nights I stared into the darkness and wondered how my life had ended up here. I spent a lot of nights sitting on that couch asking myself the same questions. How did this become my life? How did I get here? This wasn't what I thought my future would look like, and for a long time, that pain was hard to see past. Looking back now, it's easy to say I should have focused on myself or used that time to discover new hobbies and reinvent my life. But that's not where I was emotionally. I wasn't trying to reinvent myself. I was just trying to survive. And at that point, surviving was enough. Creating a new way of living. At some point, without even realizing it, life started asking more of me than survival. I wish I could tell you there was one day where everything changed. One moment where I woke up and suddenly knew who I was again. But that isn't what happened. The changes were small and easy to miss at first. I started saying yes when friends invited me to lunch and spending more time with my sister-in-laws and the people who had been showing up for me all along. They were the people I could laugh with, cry with, and be completely honest with. And that meant more than I can probably put into words. Looking back, those connections helped carry me through some really hard days. Eventually, my friend Michelle started inviting me out more. We'd go listen to music, sit outside, talk, and just enjoy being around other people. And little by little, I started remembering that life still existed outside of my pain. But one of the biggest changes wasn't what I was doing. It was what I was learning. Through Dr. Denise, I started learning how to really look at myself honestly, not from a place of shame, not from a place of blame, but from a place of growth. I knew my husband's affair was wrong. I knew I didn't deserve that. But I also knew I wasn't perfect. And I wanted to understand my own patterns, my own blind spots, and the things I could learn from my marriage. Not because I was responsible for someone else's choices, but because I wanted to become a better version of myself moving forward. For the first time in my life, I was really learning how to look at myself honestly. I was reflecting, taking accountability for my own choices, and trying to understand myself in a way I never had before. Around that same time, Dr. Christie introduced me to a whole different side of healing. She taught me about my nervous system, emotional release, and grounding techniques that helped when everything felt overwhelming. She also opened the door to a more spiritual side of myself that had always been there, but that I'd never really made space for. Looking back, I think that was the beginning of me slowing down enough to actually listen to myself. And the more I paid attention, the more I started reconnecting with who I really was. Looking back, I can see that one thing led to another. Real estate led to marketing. Marketing led to creativity. Creativity led to mama drama and trauma. And somewhere along the way, I started building a life that felt more like me. But if I'm being honest, one of the most meaningful changes happened right inside my own house. My boys and I became closer. I don't know exactly why it happened, but I think going through something so difficult together changed all of us. We became closer, understood each other differently, and learned how precious our time together really is. But something changed. These days, they'll come into the room while I'm working. One conversation turns into another. Before I know it, all three boys are sitting there talking. Sometimes we'll sit together for an hour or two just sharing stories, laughing and talking about life. And I love those moments because there was a time when I would have been too busy. There was a time when I would have finished the project, the cleaning, or whatever task I was working on before stopping to talk with my kids. But somewhere along the way, I learned something important. The work can wait. The dishes can wait, the laundry can wait, the conversation can't. My boys won't always be here. These moments won't always be available. And I've learned to stop what I'm doing and take them in while I can. We didn't create a lot of brand new traditions. Most of our holidays still look pretty similar. Most of our celebrations still look pretty similar. But we changed. And maybe that's the real tradition we've created. We've learned not to take our time together for granted. We talk more, we listen more, we make room for each other in ways we probably didn't before. And I think that's helped us make the most of the life we have instead of getting stuck wishing for the life we lost. When joy started sneaking back in. The funny thing about joy is that it rarely announces itself. At least it didn't for me. There wasn't one day where I woke up and thought, I'm healed. There wasn't one moment where all the sadness disappeared. It happened much more quietly than that. It happened one small moment at a time. One of those moments started on Mother's Day. Every year, the boys would help me get the patio ready for summer. We'd power wash everything, the table, the chairs, the patio itself. We'd wash away all the pollen, dirt, and winter buildup and get everything ready for warmer weather. At the time, I didn't realize it. But looking back, I think I was doing the same thing inside myself. Little by little, I was washing away the heaviness of survival mode. Not all at once, just enough to start letting life back in. After we got everything cleaned up, I started spending a lot more time outside. Sometimes that meant sitting with a glass of wine and listening to music. Sometimes I'd read, journal, or just hang out with Maisie. I wasn't really doing anything special, but after spending so many months buried in grief, it felt good to be outside again. There was something about feeling the sun on my face, breathing fresh air, and just slowing down for a minute that brought me back to life. Looking back, I think that's why the patio became so important to me. It wasn't just a place to sit. It became a place where I could process everything I was carrying, reconnect with myself, and remember there was still beauty in the life right in front of me. Maybe that's why the porch swing has become such a big symbol in my life. Because somewhere along the way, sitting outside reminded me that I was still here, that life was still here, and that there was still beauty waiting for me if I was willing to notice it. I remember the cicadas being incredibly loud that summer. Most people complained about them, but I loved them. There was something nostalgic about that sound. It reminded me of childhood and, in a strange way, reminded me that life keeps moving whether we're ready for it or not. I'd sit outside listening to the cicadas, taking in the warmth, the peace, and the simple fact that I was alive and sitting in that moment. And somewhere along the way, something started shifting. Not all at once and not in some dramatic way. It happened quietly. The boys would come outside and spend time with me. Derek and I would share stories, songs, and some of the wisdom he's always seemed to have beyond his years. Ryan would come out, and before long, we'd be laughing, singing karaoke, and just enjoying being together. Then Carson would show up with one of his ridiculous comments and have all of us laughing. I'd watch the boys throwing the football in the backyard, Ryan grilling dinner for everyone, and life unfolding right in front of me. Looking back, I think that's what started bringing me back to life. Not some big breakthrough, not one life-changing moment. Just a lot of ordinary moments that slowly reminded me how much beauty was still here. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't focused on what was missing. I was noticing what was still here. That's what surprised me most. Joy didn't come back because my circumstances changed. Joy came back because I started paying attention. I started noticing the conversations, the laughter, the music, the sunsets, the moments that would have been easy to miss if I had stayed focused on everything I had lost. And one of the biggest lessons life was teaching me during that season was this: don't let one painful chapter convince you that the whole story is ruined, because it isn't. My family looked different. My life looked different, and there were still plenty of moments when I felt sad. But there was laughter too. There was love, there was growth, there was connection, and most importantly, there was still so much life left to live. Looking back, I think that's when I started understanding something I couldn't see during those first months. The goal wasn't to get my old life back. The goal was to build a beautiful life from where I was standing. And maybe the biggest surprise of all was realizing that the life ahead of me might still be beautiful. Not because it looked the way I planned, but because I finally started seeing it for what it was. A second chance to be fully present, a second chance to love deeply, a second chance to appreciate the people sitting right in front of me. Some of the lessons I treasure most today came from that season, lessons I don't think I would have learned any other way. It taught me to slow down, listen more closely, and be present for the people sitting right in front of me. It taught me to stop worrying so much about the task and focus more on the person. Because at the end of the day, the dishes can wait, the work can wait, the laundry can wait, but the moments won't. And somewhere between the patio conversations, the cicadas, the music, the laughter, and the quiet evenings outside, joy slowly found its way back to me. Joy doesn't mean the pain didn't matter. For a long time, I thought healing meant one day waking up and no longer feeling sad. I thought maybe there would come a day when the pain was gone, when the grief was gone, when everything that happened no longer affected me. But that's not what healing looked like for me. The truth is, none of it just disappeared. The memories were still there, the love was still there, the sadness was still there, and so were the dreams I'd spent years building in my mind. Even now, there are things I wish had turned out differently. I wish my boys could have had the family I pictured for them, and I wish some parts of our story had gone another direction. That's just the honest truth. But somewhere along the journey, I realized something important. Finding joy doesn't mean the pain didn't matter. Moving forward doesn't mean what happened wasn't significant. Laughing again doesn't mean you didn't love what was lost. Healing isn't about replacing one feeling with another. It's about learning to carry both. It's learning that grief and joy can sit at the same table. It's learning that sadness and gratitude can exist at the same time. It's learning that life can be beautiful even when it doesn't look the way you planned. And maybe that's what this season taught me most. I learned that I was stronger than I thought I was. I always knew I was strong. I spent years raising my boys while my husband worked out of town. I handled the day-to-day responsibilities. I carried a lot. But what I didn't know was that I could carry all of it by myself if I had to. I was scared. I was terrified, actually, not because I didn't love myself, not because I wasn't capable, but because I had spent 24 years believing my future would look one way, and suddenly it looked completely different. What I learned was that I could survive that. More than survive it, I could build something new. One of the biggest things I discovered during that season was that 46 wasn't too late to start over. over. For a while, it felt like everything I had planned had fallen apart. But little by little, I began to realize there was still so much life ahead of me. There was still room for growth, purpose, new dreams, and becoming the person I wanted to be. I also learned that confidence doesn't always come from success. Sometimes it comes from surviving something you never thought you'd survive and finding a way to keep moving forward anyway. Sometimes it comes from rebuilding your life one small decision at a time. Looking back, I think that's when I started understanding my own worth in a different way. I was worth the effort, the healing, the reflection, and the work it takes to grow. I was worth investing in, even when it felt hard. And maybe one of the biggest lessons of all was realizing that nothing was standing between me and the person I wanted to become except me. The affair changed my life, the divorce changed my life, the grief changed my life, but they didn't get to decide who I became next. But those things don't get to write the ending of my story, I do. When I look back now, I don't think this chapter was really about finding joy again. I think it was about finding myself again, because the more I reconnected with myself, the more joy found its way back to me. And maybe that's the lesson I'm taking with me moving forward. The goal was never to get my old life back. The goal was to build a life I love from where I am today. One with purpose, growth, meaningful relationships, and room for whatever comes next. Most of all, I want it to be a life where I slow down enough to notice the beauty that's already here. And honestly, I think that's what coming home to yourself really means. I don't think this chapter was really about finding joy again. I think it was about finding myself again. If there's one thing I hope you take away from today's episode, it's this. Don't wait until everything is figured out before you allow yourself to experience joy. You don't need all the answers, and you don't have to know exactly where life is headed to enjoy the moments that are right in front of you. Sometimes healing looks like a deep breakthrough, and sometimes healing looks like sitting outside, listening to cicadas, laughing with your kids, and realizing life is slowly finding its way back to you. Maybe you're in a season where you're grieving something, a relationship, a dream, a version of your life you thought you'd have. If that's where you are, I want you to know that joy and grief can coexist. You don't have to choose one or the other. And just because your life looks different than you imagined, doesn't mean it can't still be beautiful. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love for you to download my free journal and spend some time reflecting on this question. What parts of my life still bring me joy even while I'm healing? You can find the journal and other resources at mommadramaandtrauma.com. And if this episode spoke to you, please consider following the podcast, leaving a review, and sharing it with someone who might need the reminder that their story isn't over. Because sometimes the life we're grieving isn't the life we're meant to stay stuck in. Sometimes it's the bridge that leads us back to ourselves. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.